Well, good evening, everyone. It is Monday night, and it's time for another Morning Cheer Monday. It is good to be with you all virtually, as is unfortunately becoming a little bit more normal these days, but it's kind of a little bit of our new normal, our new reality. But welcome on behalf of everyone at Sandy Cove. We are excited, as we've made the announcement, I guess a week or so ago, that we are aiming towards June 19th to get the Chesapeake Lodge opened up and ready to go so that we can serve guests again there. And also really excited about the opportunities that we're going to have to serve our community with the Marsh Day Camp. And so we're gearing up for that as well, and really excited about what fun opportunities we'll have to minister to Cecil County, where Sandy Cove is here in Northeast Maryland. And so we're looking forward to that with great anticipation. And then if you have not already heard, you can go on our website and check out what we're doing this summer. We've been in a season where it's a whole list of what you can't do. You can't do this, can't do that. But what we've had to do is figure out, what is it that we can do? And so we figured out with the best information we have to today. And the good news is we keep seeming to get better and better news around here as to what we can do next. And so the next thing that we're going to do this summer, what we believe we can offer and still meet all the kind of guidelines that would be safe for this summer, is something that we call power boosts. And the power boosts are the opportunity to come as a family, come together to our property, stay. We'll still take care of the meals. We'll give you 3 square meals a day. They are going to be kind of like a takeout restaurant, kind of how things have been modified for a lot of people. We'll have plenty of opportunities where you can go to eat and enjoy those meals. And then for as many opportunities as we can kind of get things going with our pools and our waterfront and some of our activities, we're kind of figuring things out. And actually today was working on scheming and plotting a few extra bells and whistles that we can try to add in of what we can do. Basically, if we can do a socially distant activity, we're going to try to figure out how to put that into the schedule. And then there'll be some spiritual encouragement along the way when you come and spend time with us. And so we're looking forward to what we can build, what we can do. This is a time that we're all dealing with what kind of cards we've been dealt. But inside of what we've been dealt, there's opportunity. And so we want to be good stewards of that and make the best of it. And so that's coming up. So all the information is best accessed on our website, sandycove.org, and we keep that very up to date, as well as social media as well. You'll have all the information there. And so tonight I want to go ahead and invite back in, for those who are faithful watchers for all of the, I think, month of podcasts that we've done, or broadcasts here that we've done. My very first time that we ventured into this, I went ahead and invited my nephew in, and he gave us some fantastic tips on kind of how to navigate some things through your family with COVID. And I wanted to invite him back in tonight to have another conversation. And part of this is motivated by a few different things. I unfortunately, in the last 3 months, have had 2 different people very close to me. One who had considered suicide as a part of their story, and I'm very grateful that they did not make the choice to take their life. And then about a week or 2 ago, found out about a Sandy Cove family who lost their husband to the story of suicide. And there's just a lot of pain and darkness in this time. And I think there's a lot of mental health issues that we need to be paying attention to. One of the things I talk about often with other believers is how you can see all throughout Scripture that it talks a lot about our brain, a lot about our mind, a lot about that. And yet, as a kid growing up in church, I don't feel like I heard it preached a lot. And so my own personal journey, I have had several different seasons where I've been in counseling and therapy sessions, all of which have been very transformative, and God has used those meetings with those individuals to lead me on a journey that was one that I became, I believe, healthier and more whole because of it. And so mental health is a big deal, and it's a big deal in this season. And so my nephew who's going to join us here is Dr. Isaac Weaver, and he is a mental health professional. And so I want to go ahead and add him in so we can have this conversation. I got a few questions that I'd love to just get his take on. So thanks for joining us again, Isaac. It's good to have you with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
For those that may not have been around on the first time, you're joining us from Canton, Ohio area.
Yep.
And then you have two beautiful kids, one wife, right?
That's right.
Very good. And you just have gone in, is it about, how long has it been now that you've launched into your own private practice? Is it about a year or so?
Not even that. So we launched in November of 2019. Okay. Yep.
Excellent. And so what's the way that people kind of stay in contact with you or find you if they want to get more information? Because you've been, in this season, you've been doing quite a bit of kind of content production and blogs and things that people can just have access to really good content. How would they find that if they're looking for that?
Yeah, so there's two really good ways. One is our website, weavercas.com. And the other is both our Twitter, Facebook, and I believe our Instagram handle is all at weavercas. So that's a great way to kind of keep up with the content.
Excellent. Well, if you're watching the news or social media, no matter where it is, there are a lot of very, very heavy headlines and things going on in our society right now, not only with the coronavirus, but also race relations within the country. And I was just thinking, one of the questions I had, and I have this kind of image in my mind, maybe because in a past life I flew in airplanes probably way too much as part of my job. And, if you've ever been on an airplane, one of the things that they're going to tell you is the oxygen masks will drop down. And if you're on a plane with your kids, you need to put your mask on first and then take care of the kids. And so my question kind of comes from that theory of, in this time, in this heaviness, what a kind of tips or advice would you give to parents that find themselves kind of having to deal with the heavy emotional issues of today? And how do you get yourself healthy enough that you could lead your family through something? So what are some things that you would say are healthy ways to kind of put your mask on first, to kind of abuse that metaphor?
Yeah, and I think that just even as we're getting started, I would just say this is such a great conversation to have. I know there's a lot of stigma around mental health. I was talking to someone the other day, and it was like, if you had a problem with your heart, we wouldn't blink. We would go sign up to go see a cardiologist, and we would just go do that when we wouldn't think anything of it. But in the United States, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health, and I think that it's great to have conversations like this because it allows us to open up and to talk about it and to see, the benefit that you can get there. One thing I'll say, even before I hop in, so I'm not providing therapy tonight, but if you feel like you need a therapist, a really great resource, and this is regardless of where you're at in the States, psychologytoday.com. It's awesome because you can see like in your area where there are counselors that you can get hooked up with. So I'll just kind of say that. And I think that, again, Stephen, this is a great way to get that conversation started. I think that, as we were kind of going back and forth before, we hopped on tonight. And I think that we're really in a cultural moment right now where I think that the reality of trauma is really strong. And, I think for some people in our country, those traumas have been more upfront and center. And for other people, they're becoming more aware of that. And I think that applies both to, the pandemic and then also obviously currently the issues that are going on around, police brutality against the African-American community. And so I think that when we look at this, one of the things that I always think about is the idea of trauma. And so when we look at counseling, trauma is really the idea of an event or a series of events that's threatening in nature. And there are really like specific criteria that you would need to meet if you're going to be treated individually for trauma. But as I was thinking about it, I think there's a couple overarching principles that would apply to anybody because we're in a very traumatic time. The first one I was thinking about as we were thinking through this was that remembering that a range of feelings is normal. And I think that sounds really like therapist-y to say. But here's really what I mean. Throughout the whole history of psychology, there's been a debate about whether suffering comes from within you or without you. And I think one of the things that's important to know is that it's okay and it's normal to have a response of grief, of anger, of anxiety when we're faced with adversity. And I think it's really actually important that we don't pathologize that. And even more importantly, it's important that we don't, I'm going to borrow a phrase here from a theologian, his name's Walter Brueggemann, that we don't narcotize it. So one of the things that we're tempted to do in the United States is when we're faced with pain, to distract ourselves, to try to numb it, to try to get away from it. And what we know from working with individuals is the best way to treat pain and to heal is we need to face those things that we're feeling, and we need to acknowledge them. So that's the first thing. So I don't know, Stephen, if that's kind of you know, resonating with you at all.
Yeah, I would tell you, I in my own experience, a few things just I'll respond to. One, as I said, kind of in the setup, some of the greatest growth in my spiritual walk came through relationships with therapists who helped kind of walk me through issues that I was facing because of their ability to ask good questions and pull stories out of me. And the range of feeling is normal would be expressed in something I found myself saying to a peer as I walked into their office today and said, it just feels like a roller coaster. Where I would tell you, like in my Monday today, there was a moment that felt like the highest high of the day, and then there were lows. And it oftentimes, you know, it could be anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes that it was on the swing up and down. And I feel like there's a certain level of emotional energy exerted just from taking those swings. Like I'm not a roller coaster guy. I don't know where you fall on the roller coaster or not guy, but like I just feel like part of the end of my day is I'm exhausted from riding the roller coaster. And yet I do think there's something to giving yourself the permission to look and go, yeah, this is a traumatic time. And the roller coaster, that's actually normal. You know, to your point, you know, you go to the radiologist and go like, hey, my heart feels like this. And when the doctor goes, actually, that's normal. That's what you want to hear, right? And unfortunately, we live in a time right now that range of emotion, that roller coaster, it is normal. Like it's okay to be exhausted from your emotional spend because it's an emotionally taxing time.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I guess the thing that I want to lean into maybe a little bit that where you led to towards the end, and I don't know if you were planning on saying more about it, is this idea of, you know, the appropriate response is really to lean in, to face your fears as opposed to kind of run or numb or check out or mask it with a drug or anything. But at the end of the day, I guess one of the questions, and I'll just ask it really transparently kind of from me, is by the time I'm done the emotional roller coaster of my day, the last thing I've got energy to do is to face anything, is to face my trauma. So how do you face your trauma when you're kind of left it all on the roller coaster?
Yeah. So two things that come to my mind. The first is remembering your body. So I know that we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think this is so important, especially when we're in this kind of like compacted area of, you know, stress right now. And I think that it's really important to remember that you have a body. And I think that sometimes when we talk about mental health, it's kind of almost a misnomer, because when we talk about mental health, it's more than just your mind. It's about all of who you are, including your body. And so I think that, there are many, many studies that show the connection between mental health and our physical health. And so I think that, if people are saying, well, what are some practical ways that I can take care of my response to trauma and how I'm at a cultural level, right, and how I'm responding to this, I would say one thing is just take care of your body. I mean, the basics. Are you finding some ways to get active, to get your heart rate up during the day? Are you keeping 3 squares of meals a day? Are you aiming for good sleep? And so I think that there's part of that where it's almost like if you think about even the way your brain is structured. I was reading something the other day that was talking about this. I mean, even the basics in our brain are lower down in our brainstem. And I think that there's a reality to one of the best things to do when you're in a really, really stressful situation is just to cover the basics first, because without those covered, you'll never be able to, kind of deal with those other higher level issues.
Yeah.
I think the second, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the reality is, I can hear your mom, my mom in certain times in my life, where I was in a bad spot, and it just as a teenager drove me crazy, but I don't think she was ever once wrong when she said it. And she'd just look at me and she's like, you just need a nap. And it was like, I was like, oh, how dare you reduce my struggle and my strife and my teenage angst to just this little thing. And yet 9 times out of 10, I'd walk away going, you know what? I am tired. Like she's probably not wrong. I probably need a nap. And so I think, take care of yourself. I think it's a really great place to go, to realizing that there are things you can do that aren't run to make an appointment with your therapist. It's run, run, take a nap, take a walk. I have a friend who is a pastor who talks about in marriage relationships, don't fight, go get donuts. It's just about how you respond to it.
Right. Sure. The second thing I was going to say too, I think that when we talk about just some practical things, I think the other thing is when we're in adverse circumstances is remembering your ways of meaning making. So one of the things that we know about adversity is that it disrupts not only our like emotional and our physical life, but it really messes with our understanding of the world. And this can be really one of the most challenging areas to treat trauma in a clinic. And it's one of the more challenging aspects of facing adversity. And some things I was thinking about was, rooting ourselves in ritual and tradition can be very helpful in times of great stress. So I was thinking, I know that there's a lot of people who follow Cove Ministries who are Christians. And I think that, if you want to think of a biblical example, we can think of the Israelites in exile, right? Hanging on to, their cultural life, hanging on to their religious life. And so it's important to make sure that when we're in times of great stress, that we really can go back to the things that we have as rituals that keep us grounded. So that could be your religious life. It could be, waking at the same time each day. It could be things that you do regularly. So that's really important. But I think the other thing that's equally important, and I think that sometimes is glossed over, is it's important to wrestle with your meaning-making systems. So not just to remember your rituals, but to wrestle with your meaning-making systems. So a lot of times what I think of when I think about the Old Testament, when we think about the Israelites who had differing accounts of why the exile even happened, right? That's contained in the Old Testament. And I think that when we're dealing with suffering, ritual helps us, but it's also helpful for us to really struggle with, to really work out the questions we have around those systems. And one quote that I wanted to throw out, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Stephen. It's actually from Mr. Rogers, and this is something that I stumbled across the other day, and I thought this was awesome. He said, in times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers. And I think the sentiment there is part of dealing with adversity is opening yourself up to questions and realizing that also is okay, and you have permission to ask those questions.
Yeah, no, that resonates deep with me. One of my favorite Bible teachers comes to Sandy Cove quite often, mainly because I keep inviting him back, is Michael Card. And one of his kind of nuggets of truth that he teaches almost every time he'll teach here is that if you want to show somebody that you love them, you listen. Like there's an assigning of value when you choose to listen to someone. And so if you want to show somebody you love them, you listen, right? You know, for both of us, you know what it's like when your wife's talking and you're not tuned in. And if you go, hey, I'm sorry I wasn't tuned in, and then you turn, you look and go, let's do that again. I want to give you my undivided attention. I mean, that assigns value to the relationship to whoever's speaking. And I would say this dovetails well. I posted on my private social media a conversation between two pastors that happened this weekend, John Gray and Steve Furtick. And it was on the issue of race relation in the church. And I have been on a journey over the past probably 2 years or more, as God's kind of been stirring in me to kind of understand and figure out and learn a lot about race. And I've been on a crazy journey with a lot of opportunities that I've been just spoiled and blessed with. But of all the things, you know, I'm a at essence, like in my core, I want to solve problems. And so I'm reading this race issue, you know, books, all the books I can get, and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to solve this problem. And you get into reading these books and the systemic issues inside of our culture, and you realize quickly this isn't something where, you know, A plus B equals C, and I'm not solving this problem. And it now, I think the thing that makes me think about that is the thing that I've come to over and over in what I've studied about race relations is the value of conversations, the ability to sit with someone who's from a different culture and listen, not in a way to fact check or prove or anything, but just to listen from that place where you go, hey, I want to ascribe value to you and sit and listen to your story and to your heart, not so that I can respond, not so that I can come up with a quip or, you know, I've got a lot of issues and we can go to a whole thing on social media, but the end of the day, I think I think one of the things that will come out of the pandemic is a realization that, true conversation is what we desire and what we missed. There is a tiny verse that I potentially maybe I might overemphasize it, but I don't think that it is unfair to say it's in Scripture, so it counts and it's important. It's God breathed. It's part of God's word. And I believe it's 3 John 1 towards the end, where he basically ends this letter and says, you know, I've got so much more to say, but I want to do it face to face because it's better that way. And there's this kind of a biblical assignment that says, you know, you and I have had the privilege of spending almost every Thanksgiving together for probably almost your entire life and the better part of my life. And I can tell you that while this is fun and I enjoy being able to connect with you, I'd much rather be at your parents' house sitting in the same room. And I think one of the things that comes out of this pandemic is the reality that we fall back in love with conversations, or at least it's my hope that we fall back in love with conversations, because I think that's what we need. And I guess my big issue, I will put a little plug in there. I don't believe it's happening in social media. But you hit a few trigger points, so I apologize for responding maybe more. I want to ask a follow-up question to you. Can you speak more about you used a term that was new for me, meaning-making systems? So unpack that. Define what that what a meaning-making system is.
Sure. So one of the things that we know from, so if you look at like post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, one of the symptoms of traumatic stress actually has to do with how your thinking and your mood change in response to a trauma. And I think for some people who are maybe outside of mental health and who don't know how those decisions are made about like a diagnosis, one of the things that's very unique about trauma is we actually monitor a shift in how someone sees the world, and that can actually be, for many people, very problematic and understandable. I mean, people who have seen things that are very violent, are very oppressive, up close, have their ways of making sense of the world shift. And so I think when I'm talking about a meaning-making system, I mean, it's an overarching way for how you make sense of what the world is. And for different people, those different things. But the important part is helping people heal means helping them develop a way of making sense of their life that allows them to flourish. And I think that sometimes the reason why I want to include both of those examples from the Old Testament is that I think sometimes we can rush back to our rituals and we can rush back to the way that we've always done things, and we don't give ourselves permission to question what we had to begin with. And I think part of healing means that we can have permission to struggle with those things, to acknowledge that it's hard to make sense of the world when such horrible things happen. And so that's what I mean by meaning-making systems.
Yeah, and I think it's, to me, as I hear you talk about that, it definitely resonates in this time where you see things, and it does kind of, push at your kind of fabric of, this is what I thought the rules were. This is where I thought we were as a culture. I thought we had made it here. And then when you see that that's not where we are, that's not our current reality, it's gear grinding. But I think, as you describe that as definitely a part of the trauma journey, I go, oh yeah, trauma is absolutely the right word. Where I think many of us lay people would go, and especially, in the kind of family I grew up in, it was definitely, trauma was for the really hurt people. I don't want to, I don't know that I ever went to the emergency room, regardless of needing to go when I was a kid, because, my mom was of the mind, like, no, that's for the really sick people. And you could literally be dying, and that you were in the way of the really sick people, because we're never them. But I think it's important that we recognize this is, traumatic, what we're all experiencing, what we're all watching, because I don't know that many of us either believe or wanted to believe that where we are is where we are.
And there's certainly, I think part of it too is that there's definitely levels of distinction, right? So there are criteria that you have to meet to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's certainly limits to the language, even if we're kind of thinking in metaphorically. But I think that I don't think that it's untrue to say that some of the things that we're experiencing at a cultural level are traumatic in a more global sense.
It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever read or seen anything about this, but I got invited to a forum discussion on race, and one of the people who was invited to the conversation was a neuroscientist who had just got done doing studies on neuroscience relationship to race. And one of the things that she had discovered is that when white people talk about race, it triggers the trauma portion of the brain. And so there is this kind of, I think, visceral reaction, this biological thing that's at some levels working against having the conversations. To me, I go, well, that explains why it's so hard to seemingly have these hard conversations when you find yourself trying to discuss bigger issues and race issues. It's just it is a challenge to articulate where you are, what you believe. And for me, I think part of my journey that's been a little jarring is to have pieces of kind of your and I think I'm going to test this and see if I'm using it right, but like, my meaning making system, to realize that part of my historical meaning making system is just not true. Like, I was not given the right data. And so when you have to kind of rebuild or reconstruct, that takes some effort. And I think at some levels, part of what I think is going on is that a lot of people just aren't willing to do the work. It's just too hard. And so I'm going to go back to the comfort zone of my meaning making system that I learned, because it's too much work to relearn it or replace it with, unfortunately, the truth. But that's more narrative or, whatever. So I want to ask, as we've kind of talked a little bit about kind of our own journeys and kind of how to get healthy, what are some things that you could give that might be tips in kind of helping others on the journey? And I'm thinking kind of households. So, how do I care for my wife's mental health journey through this? How do I care and lead my kids through their mental health journey? Realizing that we're in a traumatic situation, and my lens is not my wife's lens, it's not my kid's lens, but as someone who wants good for them, how do I help them walk along that journey? It's kind of like, to go back to that original metaphor. Okay, I've got my oxygen mask on. How now what's the proper procedure of how do I get that mask onto those that I love that are with me?
Sure. So I think I want to shift gears here a little bit, and I think we're talking about kind of where we're at right now in the States, kind of the culture, and I know that we talked about we want to focus on a little bit more like kind of like how the family functions and how we can think about those day-to-day interactions. And I think that when I think about a family, I really see a family as an ecosystem. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently. We just started our garden. It's proving to be needs a lot of work for the ecosystem. Don't want to stretch that metaphor too far. But what I think if we think about an ecosystem, a family is way different than an individual, right? I mean, you have to have all parts of the family kind of functioning, firing on all pistons for it to be healthy. And so I think there's a couple things came to my mind that, currently I think could be helpful. So I think the first tip I would give is 2 words: parents first. And first at the dinner table. I'm just kidding. I'd be okay with that. What I mean is healthy families follow a pattern where parents are first fundamentally. And so what I mean by this is they're distinct from their children. Okay. Parents need to be fundamentally aligned with each other, and they have to be absolutely clear that they are a team working on behalf of their children and their family. And this sounds so simple that almost when I was kind of writing it and I was thinking about it today, I was like, wow, this sounds so simple, but it's really not. Many parents, when they're under a lot of stress, might start to align more strongly with their kids than they do with their partner. And when we think about this, we want to make sure that parents have a team mentality. Okay. And so for me, a team mentality means that you guard time to work on your relationship. So that could mean something as simple as going on a date. It could mean actually setting plans for your week together, thinking ahead of time, right? Or even carving out time to have hard conversations. So you really want to plan for it and you want to protect it. And I think that especially when we're in really stressful situations, it's important to remember that parents first. So the idea is that you want to make sure that you guard that. And in family therapy, the fancy word for it is it's a dyad. So the parental dyad. It's like saying, if that's not healthy, you really can't have a healthy family system as a whole.
Yeah, and just to interject there, I think it highlights the challenge that so many in our culture face that find themselves in a situation that they're parenting alone, that you have a single parent household. And so but I would assume that that care and that structure of kind of parents first still kind of, the almost maybe more so does the single parent need to find themselves not losing the opportunity to prioritize themselves and their mental health, no matter how their support system around them is set up.
Right. And you hit the nail on the head, because what it's really about is your role. So what is your role in the caretaking of a child? And part of that is making sure you have a healthy boundary between you and a child. Not saying that it's like a distant relationship, but that you're able to take care of yourself. The second thing that I've been thinking about, and I'll make this brief, trying to keep it on the time here, is learning how to set clear expectations and how to follow up with rewards. I want to give you a recommendation for a book that I think everybody should read. It's called Your Defiant Child. And it's by a guy named Russell Barkley. And it's kind of it makes you think that your child has to be, defying you before you read it, but it's an awesome book. And what it is Russell Barkley, people in mental health world will know his name. He is really the foremost expert in the world on ADHD. And he wrote an excellent book on how to set up like really healthy disciplinary strategies with your kids. And so this is something I recommend anybody that comes to see me at my clinic and we're working on this. We're doing therapy together, but I always recommend this book because it's such a great resource. And so the second thing that I'm thinking when we talk about how do we keep your family healthy during times of stress is, again, this is actually kind of a basic. This is not a high and lofty idea. This is actually the basics of how you parent children. And so that's one other resource I would recommend. I don't know, do you guys at Sandy Cove, is that something that you host speakers on and such, kind of, discipline or kind of the health of the family?
Yeah, I mean, so our family camp, there's a lot of conversation that happens around what does a healthy family look like? I mean, our vision is really to build biblically based healthy families, and so we're kind of always looking at how do you resource in the direction of, and for me, I shared this. I can't remember which week is which. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was talking with Michael Dorsey. And we were talking about the idea of how you define health. And again, you brought up earlier, and I appreciate it, is, all the categories of health touch, right? So mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, physical health, they all touch and they all have similar pathways. They all require discipline. They all have rewards. But my kind of core definition of health when I'm teaching in my teams or in my environment is, I define health as which direction are your feet pointed. And one of the things that we're really clear about when even how we unpack what our lofty vision is in building healthy families is it's very important to make the distinction. We're not saying we want you to be a perfect family, because at some level we don't know that we believe that exists. We want you to be healthy. And healthy families are on a journey, right? And so there's going to be learning along the way, but it really matters, whether it's your physical health. If you're on a diet journey, are you pointed towards the couch or the refrigerator or the running machine? In the spiritual realm, it's are you facing the cross or are you walking away? Like, which direction are you headed? That to me is what defines health. And so, yeah, we talk a lot about like, what does it mean for a family to be pursuing health? And as you brought up, it really is in every kind of facet. And so I do think that we can sometimes want to oversimplify it to go, well, we're just going to be spiritually healthy and the rest of it will come. And I don't find a lot of biblical support for that kind of theology or practice. I do think that, as we're having this whole conversation, is the idea that we need to be able to talk about mental health because it is a part of how God created
Sure.
us. And
Sure.
so, yeah.
Right. And I think that there's one of my favorite psychologists. His name is Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and he's a developmental psychologist. So he only studies children's development. And one of the things that a big portion of his research was on contextual factors with kids. So not what a child is like inside, but what is their environment like? And it's just, the research is replete with examples of how when you change a child's environment, you can really change their trajectory, like how they develop. And so I think that all these things it's like a stew. We're kind of just putting it all in there and trying to make a good pot of stew. And I think that so the last thing I was thinking too, I'll just kind of throw this in there. This won't be a popular one, which is why I saved it for last. And truly, I think that I really want to kind of affirm that when we're talking about these big issues and these concerns, when we look at your family, you need to have things that are concrete that you can really hang your hat on, things that you can do that you feel like, okay, this is something I can do day in and day out. And the one thing that I would also say is keeping an eye on screen time. And, it's really ironic. I spoke about this, I don't know, maybe a few weeks before COVID hit. And I was like, wow, it's like, I'm eating my words, in so many ways, life has changed. And I always feel a little bit like a hypocrite when it comes to this area because I have 2 toddlers. But one of the things that I think is actually really important to think about as a culture, and again, we're thinking about this as a community, not just as in mental health world, but we're thinking about this as a community, is the impact of screens on our mind and on our behavior. And I think that what I would say is this, I think that there's always been throughout the generations, there's, a new technology comes up and then sometimes we're quick to just try to dismiss it and say it's bad, or we just highlight the bad things about it. And there's certainly excellent things that come from screens, right? I mean, even what we're doing right now, I'm almost, I know how it works, but I'm still kind of amazed that we're doing this. But what I would say is that we do have knowledge, and there's guidelines, right? The American Pediatric Academy has guidelines around this about why we want to limit children's exposure to screens. And to me, the things I always boil it down to is 2 things. One is that screens, they definitely impact our bodies at the level of our brain. So either by increasing cortisol. So we know that exposure to screens can increase the stress response in your body. They've actually done studies where you can even have your phone in the same room, okay, and it increases cortisol. And that's because in this day and age, our phone isn't just, picking up the phone and calling Uncle Steven. It's all the responsibilities I have. It's all the things that are coming up on my media feed. So that can be stressful. But then also when we look at dopamine, it's kind of like the opposite in a way. The ability of kind of develop habits, right? So it can be totally addicting to be in front of a screen. And I promise you, you'll never beat a screen, right? I mean, Paw Patrol and Noomi Zoomy and all that stuff is way more interesting and entertaining than I am. And so I think that one of the things about this is that one way that you can protect your family and you can make sure you're adding to their health is not throwing out everything and saying nothing of this, but moderating screen usage. And so basic things that I tell folks, and again, this is not coming from a place of judgment. I mean, I think many people have never even thought about what would it look like to put a limit on screen time. Some people have not, that's not kind of entered the conversation. So limiting screen time. I think the second thing is planning pleasurable activities that are outside. So kind of getting out there with your family, finding things to do where you can interact. But the other thing I would say is if you're going to have screen time, and we will, and we're going to have more of it right now because we're stuck at home, is finding ways to do this as a family. So one example, and this might sound a little corny, but like the last month, I've watched a Disney movie like every Saturday with my kids. And I was thinking, it's probably not as good as getting out in the yard and running around, but sometimes, we just all need a break. But it's kind of cool because it's like creating these little memories with my kids. And so I think that, as a family, there's ways to do these things that are in moderation and help you bond rather than kind of separate you. So I'm sure I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Stephen. I'm sure that that's come up as a concern, as a topic quite a lot.
There's a little too much conviction. I'm glad that you confessed first, so I don't have to go first on that. But we're in very similar paths with our kids around the same ages, and so for us, my wife would tell you, screen time kind of equals survival mode in our house.
Sure.
Now, once the weather's gotten nicer, it's made a difference, and I don't want to shock you in public for your own response, but we actually did. She actually did get me out, and we went hiking this weekend. But there was something really, rich for me and for us as a family unit to drive somewhere away, have a picnic. It was gorgeous weather, So Sunday morning we went to the waterfalls, and Brock, my 4-year-old, goes, I've never seen a waterfall. And so there's this whole first thing. It's this big deal of what is a waterfall? And so we see it from the top and you see it from the bottom. And of course, his mom's amazing and adventuresome. And so she takes him over, puts his hand under the thing, and all these, you're just there's nothing that replaces that. To your point, Marshall might be his best friend from Paw Patrol, but Marshall didn't take him and put his hand under the waterfall that. It was just a and yet the one thing for us was it came out kind of early into the COVID when it was hey, sports went away, and everyone that was a sports junkie was I got to watch competition, and I found some clickbait caught me, and I found it, and I went, yeah, I'll watch that. And Brock and I have started watching marble racing. Which, if you haven't seen it, it's one of the most entertaining things I've found over the last 3 months. But it's one of those things that it is a screen, but it's one of our things. For him to sit and watch marble racing with Dad, and he always we go okay, which marble are you going to pick? And he waits till the race starts, and he goes, I want the one in the lead. I want the one in the lead.
Yeah, smart.
Okay, buddy. So. I think there is something to the idea of going, and even my comments earlier about social media. Social media is not inherently evil, right? Social media is how we're doing this, and I don't think what we're doing is evil. And yet, the reality is, the medium can and be misused, and I think we can lean into and abuse the screen times. And I think it becomes part of it is in our culture, it's become too convenient. I read I was listening or read somewhere, we've essentially moved to a streaming culture where, it's no longer, if you think about it, when I grew up, as long ago as that was, and I don't know exactly what it meant for you growing up, but it was a really big deal to get driven to the movie theater and go and see a movie that could only be accessed by that way. That was the only vehicle. And so it was a big deal that you got tickets ahead of time. You went, and there was a cultural moment. It was who did you see that with? Were you one of the first? Did you see it opening weekend? There's all this dynamics. But there was a cultural thing, and it was a together thing, and that was a big deal. Whereas, I can go upstairs right now and have access to hundreds of thousands of movie titles, and if I press play and I don't hit stop, when it gets done, it just goes to the next one. It just so we're in this loop that the systems, if we don't take control, will just keep us in an endless stream. And again, the comment we made earlier, it takes effort. It's hard work, but it needs to be done.
Right. And I think in some ways, the ship has sailed. We're living in a world now where we have all these things. And so the answer is not, let's try to get rid of everything that we have, but it is to say, let's be good stewards in the sense that we understand how these things affect us, both at the level of our body and our physiology, and then also with our mind. And so I think that it's really about just understanding how things affect us. There's a really great, wish I can remember the title of this article, but if you even Google, I think New York Times New York Times cortisol technology. That should get it for you. It's an excellent article that was written about. It's basically a compilation of the studies that we have about how screens affect our bodies. And again, I think that it's almost something we don't have to view as something that's like bad. It's just something to kind of be curious about, to learn about, so that we can make wise decisions for our families.
Excellent.
I'll see if I can find that article for you. It's a good one.
That's good. Yeah, if you do, we'll add it to the comments after it gets posted here. Did I get this right? weavercas.com?
Yep, absolutely.
And then just the Weaver CAS will get you to any part of the social media attachments to find Isaac after we hang up here. I want to go ahead and thank you again for making yourself available.
Yeah, thanks,
all
Stephen.
of us. A very great conversation about stuff that we need to be talking about and thinking about. And so I appreciate you making yourself available for us. So we'll go ahead and say good night to you, and thanks for being with us, Isaac. Well, I want to thank all of you for tuning in and sticking around. Unfortunately, Weavers, as a family trait, brevity is not something we got, which you'll get tonight. As you see, we went a little long. But hopefully there, inside of all that, there was something that you could take, that you could make practical, that you can have a conversation in your home about. As we kind of are looking in this kind of morning cheer, the vision for the morning cheer broadcast is not to, we had conversations. We go, listen, we can't replicate what Sandy Cove is and what we do there on our property, but we want a resource. We want to be a place that brings voices and brings encouragement and points you in the right direction during this kind of crazy season that we're in. And so hopefully this was helpful to you. I'm grateful for those who have been commenting and joining us week after week. And I have found myself saying this oftentimes, I think, to others, because I want to hear myself saying it, but we're going to get through this. This is not forever. And there's been a lot of positive signs here in Maryland, even of where things are heading. And I am excited to see what opportunities we have for something new. I think I shared a couple weeks ago from Isaiah that verse that calls us not to chase after what's the next thing, but what's the new thing that God wants to do. And so that's what we're praying about. That's what we're chasing after at Sandy Cove. And when we figure it out, we'll let you know. And stay up to date with all of our kind of what is going on and what we are able to do at sandycove.org. And I look forward to being back next week. Really excited to share with you a conversation with one of our speakers that we've fallen in love with. Just a great guy, huge heart. He goes by CZ, Curtis Zachary. If you want to go ahead and get a great book and read it between now and then, his book on the soul is something that I would highly recommend. And so we'll have that conversation next week. And until then, I will just sign off and tell you that it is as true as it was the day Dr. Palmer got on the radio and shared it with you. Jesus never fails. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.